My name is Elaine Mercer, and I am 62 years old. For most of my life, I believed that generosity was a kind of language, spoken most fluently in families. My mother, Darlene, raised me and my younger brother, Kyle, under the mantra that family shares everything. She said it so often it felt like a law of nature, right up there with gravity and morning frost on the windows in January. I suppose that's why, when she fell on hard times last year, I didn't hesitate. I invited her to move into my house, my quiet, tidy two-bedroom bungalow on the east side of town. I'd bought it myself 15 years earlier, after my divorce, and I'd kept it well maintained, mortgage paid off, utilities stable, budget predictable. I liked my order. I liked knowing what was mine, what I worked for, and what I could control. Mom arrived with 3 suitcases and a tone that hovered somewhere between gratitude and command. "We'll make this work," she said that first evening. "We'll contribute equally, all of us. That's only fair." She nodded as though she were setting policy. I just smiled. I had no intentions of charging my mother a cent. If she wanted to contribute, fine, but the house was mine, and I was happy to help. For the first couple of weeks, things even felt peaceful. She cooked dinner some nights, fussed over my rose bushes, and watched old detective shows with me after work. But then I began noticing subtle changes, first in the air, then in the house, then in her tone. She made comments about the electric bill, how high it was. She asked why I bought the expensive kind of laundry detergent. She criticized my grocery choices, too many fresh vegetables, not enough canned goods. "You're spending like you think money grows on trees," she'd say, shaking her head with theatrical disappointment. At first, I brushed it off. Then Kyle showed up one Saturday, empty-handed as usual, but full of questions that didn't sound like his own. Why did I insist on handling all the household accounts myself? Why was everything still in my name, if Mom was now living here too? It was as if my brother and mother were reading from the same script. That night, I sat in my bedroom and listened to the murmurs of their conversation downstairs. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone told me enough. Something was shifting. Something quiet, but deliberate. And something told me I needed to start paying attention. Because whenever someone insists that everyone contributes equally, they often mean something very different from equality. I just didn't know yet how far that difference would go, or how much of my own life they quietly planned to claim. And I didn't know that the first real crack in this arrangement would appear the moment my mother asked a question that would change everything. "So Elaine, why are the bills still in your name?" I looked up at her, stunned, unsure if I'd heard correctly. And that moment, though I didn't yet realize it, was the start of the unraveling. The question hung in the air, absurd at first, then quietly ominous. Mom sat across from me at the kitchen table, tapping a freshly manicured nail against her coffee mug. "I mean," she continued, "if we're all supposed to be contributing equally, shouldn't the bills reflect that? Shouldn't they be in our names? Or at least not just yours?" I laughed softly, thinking she had misspoken. "Mom, the house is mine. I paid it off. I've lived here 15 years. Why would the bills be in anyone else's name?" She didn't blink. "Because this is our household now." Her tone had cooled. "It just looks strange. You're acting like you're in charge of everything." I swallowed hard, confused. "I'm not acting like anything. This is my home. You're living with me because you needed support." She tilted her head. "Kyle thinks it makes you look controlling." There it was. The first real sting. The one that told me this wasn't an innocent question. I felt my heart thud, slow, heavy, deliberate. "Kyle?" I managed. "You talked to him about this?" "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, waving a hand. "Families talk. And he's right, you shouldn't hold everything over people by keeping every bill in your name. It's not fair." Fair. That word again. That night, I couldn't shake the discomfort. Something about the conversation felt rehearsed. Coordinated. And as days passed, things escalated. Kyle started showing up more often. Too often. He'd stroll into my house without knocking, raid my fridge, and then lecture me about shared responsibility. He complained that I had too much control over the household. That I made decisions without consulting them. That the home shouldn't be centered around one person's authority. Authority over my own home. A week later, I overheard something chilling. I had stepped into the hallway when I heard my mother speak in a low, eager voice. If we can just get the utilities moved over, the rest will fall into place. She can't hold everything forever. Silence. Then Kyle's reply. She won't know until it's done. People her age aren't good with online accounts. My age. As though I were a fragile antique. My stomach twisted. They weren't talking about fairness. They were talking about leverage. That evening, I walked into the living room and found them on my laptop, looking at my utility accounts. My mother jumped. Kyle tried to minimize the screen, but not before I saw the change of ownership forms. What are you doing? I asked, my voice low. Mom smiled, caught but pretending not to be. We're just trying to help you, Elaine. You take on too much. Let us share. Share. Another word ruined. I closed the laptop slowly. If you ever access my accounts again, you won't be living here. Either of you. Kyle scoffed. You can't just toss Mom out. She has rights too. His confidence scared me. Rights? Over my home? Mom looked at me like I was being unreasonable, childish even. You're overreacting. If we're all contributing equally, we deserve transparency. We deserve access. And something clicked then. Something cold. Something old. Something that told me this wasn't about support. This was about control, masked as equality. But I still didn't know just how coordinated their plan was. Not until I discovered what else they'd done behind my back. To understand how things reached this point, you'd need to know the history, the decades of dynamics layered beneath every word my family spoke. Growing up, my mother had two very different relationships with her children. With me, the eldest, she was demanding. Expectant. I was the responsible one, the helper, the mediator. I learned early that my value lay in what I could carry without complaint. I cooked, cleaned, soothed, solved. My needs were secondary, sometimes invisible. With Kyle, the younger child by 7 years, she was indulgent. Protective to the point of blindness. He struggled through school, drifted through jobs, floated from one friend's couch to another. But in Mom's eyes, he was a misunderstood soul. He just needs time, she'd say. He just needs patience. Patience that she expected me to provide. When our father died, she leaned on me, emotionally and financially, while shielding Kyle from responsibility. She believed I could handle anything. She believed Kyle couldn't handle much at all. So naturally, when she started struggling last year, I stepped in. I didn't want to see her in some bleak apartment alone, drowning in medical bills. And I didn't want Kyle manipulating her, as he often had, convincing her to drain her savings for his latest business idea. But as soon as she moved in, old patterns resurfaced. One night, I overheard a phone call she was having with a cousin. Elaine has always had more, she said. She kept that house to herself all these years while we lived in cramped places. It's only fair we share it now. Share. That ache again. I started paying attention, closer, sharper. I began noticing the hints she dropped in conversations. How she told people we were living in our home. How she criticized me for being territorial. How she said Kyle needed stability and a permanent place to get his life back on track. A permanent place. Slowly, a pattern emerged. They weren't just trying to move into my life. They were trying to rewrite the narrative of ownership itself. They spoke as if the house should logically become a family asset. As if my decades of work did not matter. As if fairness meant dividing something that only I had built. It brought back memories. Years earlier, after my divorce, Mom had urged me to move in with her, temporarily, claiming it would help us all share the load. I'd resisted, wanting independence, and eventually bought this home instead. She never fully forgave me for that, for choosing autonomy over familial enmeshment. Perhaps now she saw an opportunity. A second chance to pull me back into the fold she always wanted, one where I took care of everything, while she and Kyle took advantage of my labor. And Kyle. I remembered how he once tried to get our mother to sign over her small lake cabin to him, because it's not fair that Elaine got the house. A lie, of course. The house was mine alone, bought long after I'd left home. Mom didn't sign the cabin over. But she didn't exactly shut the idea down either. The more I pieced together these memories, the more something icy settled in my chest. This wasn't spontaneous conflict. This was a long, simmering expectation, finally given shape. Still, I didn't know the depth of their intentions until I found the manila folder hidden in my mother's room. Inside it were printed forms. Legal forms. Forms that suggested they were planning something far more serious than access to utility accounts. Something that could dismantle my life if I didn't act carefully. I didn't set out to snoop. I truly didn't. But one morning, while gathering linens to wash, I found a manila folder half-tucked under my mother's bed. A corner poked out, just enough to catch my eye. And for reasons I couldn't name at the time, my breath hitched. I pulled it out slowly, my hands trembling before I even knew why. Inside were printouts. Legal documentation. Typed instructions. And a handwritten note that made my knees weaken. Discuss with Kyle before submitting. If Elaine refuses, we'll move forward another way. Move forward with what, exactly? I kept reading, my pulse pounding in my ears. They had downloaded co-residency claim forms, paperwork regarding joint household responsibility, and even information about tenant rights, including sections highlighting how long-term residents may, under certain circumstances, claim certain protections. None of this should have applied to them. None of it. But the part that made my stomach drop was a scribbled line in my mother's handwriting. Utility accounts first. Establish equal contribution. Then address property. Property. My property. I sat on the edge of her bed as the truth settled into place. They weren't just looking for access. They were building a case. Piece by piece. Document by document. Conversation by conversation. I needed clarity, so I started my own quiet investigation. First, I checked my online accounts. And I found attempted logins, multiple, flagged under suspicious activity. Someone had been trying to access my utilities, mortgage records, and even my property tax portal. Second, I checked the mail. Several envelopes addressed to the Mercer household had arrived recently, something I'd never authorized. I contacted the utility company and learned that someone had attempted to request a shared account modification. The representative told me, a woman claiming to be the co-head of household said you wanted the names updated. Co-head of household. My mother. Third, I carefully monitored conversations. I let them talk, undisturbed. And I listened. Closely. With the calm patience of someone who had spent a lifetime observing patterns. I found out that Kyle had encouraged our mother to take precautionary steps, in case Elaine tries something. The irony nearly made me laugh. They were plotting behind my back while framing me as the dangerous one. And then came the moment that crystallized everything. A voicemail. I hadn't recognized the number, so I almost ignored it. But something nudged me to play it. The message was from a local legal aid office. Hello, this message is for Darlene Mercer. Your appointment to discuss household rights and cohabitation protections is scheduled for Tuesday at noon. My mother was seeking legal advice about rights in my home. The betrayal wasn't hypothetical anymore. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't misinterpretation. It was documented. Structured. Planned. I sat in my car in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. They were building a case. Slowly, quietly, but deliberately. What they didn't know, what they could never anticipate, was that once I fully understood their motives, the balance of power shifted. I was no longer the unassuming, conflict-avoiding daughter. I was the owner of the home. And now, I was the one documenting. But documentation is only useful if you know how, and when, to reveal it. And I knew that moment was coming. I didn't confront them immediately. I wanted the full picture first. If they were building a narrative, I needed to build a counter-narrative, one rooted in truth, facts, and meticulous detail. So I started gathering evidence. I saved every attempted account login notice. Every mailer addressed incorrectly. Every overheard conversation typed into a document. Every time Kyle entered my home without permission. Every comment my mother made about rights and sharing the property. I cataloged dates, times, screenshots. In a single week, I accumulated more proof than I expected. But the moment everything clicked into sharp clarity came during a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I had stepped into the hallway to grab a load of laundry, and their voices drifted down from the kitchen. Kyle, once the bills are switched, it'll be easier. Then we'll say we've been financially responsible for months. Mom, she'll be upset, but she can't legally kick me out. Not after I've established residency. Kyle, and when her health gets worse. Mom cut him off. Don't talk like that. Kyle lowered his voice again. I'm just saying, she's not getting younger. We need security. Security. Property. Rights. They weren't talking about contributing. They were talking about claiming. My heart thudded. A cold, steady rhythm. But instead of fear, something else rose in me, clarity. Later that evening, I checked the folder again. This time, I looked more carefully at the timelines of the forms. Many of the tenant protections required months of established financial contribution or demonstrated reliance on the property as a primary residence. They were positioning themselves to fit within those parameters. Carefully. Strategically. But here's the thing about strategy, it only works if the other player isn't watching. One night, when they both stepped out to the grocery store, I sat down at my computer and drafted 3 letters. A formal notice revoking Kyle's permission to enter the property. A clear statement of household expectations for my mother, written, dated, and signed as a homeowner. A request for a consultation with a property attorney. I kept the letters private for the time being. But creating them helped me understand something essential. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't trapped. And I wasn't confused anymore. They had been building a narrative of dependency, one where Kyle needed stability and Mom needed protection. One where I was the unreasonable, controlling homeowner preventing family unity. But now I finally understood the truth. They were preparing to take advantage of the very generosity I'd offered out of love. And they were counting on me to be too shocked, too soft, or too guilt-ridden to push back. They had underestimated me. And the next step, the moment the truth fully surfaced, came the following afternoon, when the legal aid office called again. This time, I answered. Hello, is this Darlene Mercer? The voice asked. No, I replied calmly. This is her daughter. And I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Can you tell me what this consultation was regarding? There was a pause. Then the representative said, she mentioned concerns about cohabitation rights, shared property use, and access to household accounts. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. That was the moment every piece locked into place. And I realized exactly what I needed to do next. The confrontation didn't happen in anger. It didn't explode in shouting or accusation. I waited until the house was quiet, the sun was down, and the tension in the air was thick but still. Mom sat at the dining table sipping tea. Kyle was scrolling on his phone, feet propped on my coffee table like he'd been born in that spot. I placed a folder on the table. Calm. Centered. Measured. What's this? Mom asked. Documentation, I said softly. Before we go any further, I want everything on the table. Kyle scoffed. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, that I know about the legal consultations. The attempts to change account ownership. The mailbox changes. The tenant rights paperwork. And the plans you've been discussing. Silence. A silence so sharp it felt like glass. Mom's face blanched. Kyle stared like he was waiting for me to laugh. When I didn't, he shifted uneasily. You're misunderstanding, Mom said, her voice trembling with indignation. I opened the folder. Attempted logins into my utility accounts. Forms printed from your room. A voicemail from legal aid. Mail addressed to the Mercer household. A record of Kyle entering my property without permission. One by one, I laid the pieces on the table. Elaine, Mom whispered, you're twisting things. We were trying to protect ourselves. What if you get sick? What if something happens to you? Kyle jumped in. Yeah, we need stability. You can't expect us to live here with no security. I looked at them both. I never asked you to live with insecurity. I asked you to respect that this is my home. My responsibility. My effort. My investment. Not a communal asset you can claim by paperwork and manipulation. Mom's chin quivered. You're being cruel. No, I said, voice steady, I'm being clear. I slid 2 envelopes forward. One contains a formal letter revoking Kyle's access to the property. Effective immediately. Kyle's eyes widened. You can't do that. Oh, I can. And I have. I slid the second envelope toward my mother. This one outlines expectations if you want to continue living here. You will not pursue any legal actions without my consent. You will not attempt to alter ownership of accounts. And you will not coordinate with Kyle to undermine my authority in my own home. Her eyes filled with tears, not sadness, but indignation. You think I would betray my own daughter? She asked. I met her gaze. You already have. Kyle stood up, fists clenched. You're ridiculous. We're family. You can't just throw people out on the street. Watch me, I said. He froze. My tone wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was final. This ends tonight, I said. All of it. Mom stood too, her voice rising. If you kick Kyle out, I'll never forgive you. I inhaled slowly. Then that will be your choice. Kyle cursed under his breath and stormed toward the hallway. And that was when he made the mistake that revealed everything. He muttered, she'll regret this when we file. Finish that sentence, I said. He froze. They had planned to file something. A claim. A form. Something that would harm me. That was the final confirmation I'd been waiting for. The confrontation was over. The consequences were about to begin. The next morning unfolded with the quiet gravity of an eclipse. Kyle packed his things, loudly, angrily, stomping around as though noise could intimidate me into changing my mind. But I stayed firm. When he reached the door, he turned back. This isn't over, he said. It is, I replied. You just don't like the outcome. He left. Mom didn't speak to me the entire day. She closed herself in her room, emerging only to glare or sigh dramatically. But the shift in energy was unmistakable. The power dynamics had realigned. She understood that the plan had collapsed. The next step was legal. I met with a property attorney the following week. I laid out everything, documents, screenshots, attempted account changes. The attorney listened carefully. This is a manipulation pattern, she said. especially the coordinated attempt to establish residency claims. You handled it correctly. She drafted a written boundary agreement protecting me from any future claims and ensuring that Mom's stay was categorized as voluntary and temporary. I had her sign it, witnessed and notarized. Mom cried. She accused me of treating her like a stranger. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply said, "You sought legal leverage. I'm protecting myself." A few days later, she quietly asked if she could stay. But something had changed in her, subtle, but unmistakable. The entitlement was gone. The assumption of ownership had evaporated. She cooked without commentary. She asked before inviting Kyle over. She stopped snooping. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. It was a recalibration. Then came the final consequence. A month later, my mother decided to relocate to a senior apartment complex closer to her sisters. She framed it as wanting more independence, though we both knew the truth. She understood that she could not, would not, control my home. Kyle didn't visit again. The day she moved out, she stood in the driveway with her suitcase and looked at me. "I didn't mean for things to go so far," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "But they did." A long silence passed between us, decades of misunderstood roles, unspoken resentments, and tangled expectations compacted into that stillness. She finally nodded. "Thank you for helping me, even if I didn't show appreciation." I hugged her. Not as the daughter she tried to control, but as the woman I had become, one with boundaries, clarity, and peace. As her taxi pulled away, I stood in the quiet morning air, breathing deeply. My house felt like mine again. My life felt like mine again. And for the first time in months, I felt safe. But the reflection, the deeper understanding, didn't come until later, in the solitude of reclaimed space. After the dust settled, after my mother moved into her new place and my home returned to quiet stability, I spent long evenings reflecting. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. People assume that betrayal always feels sharp, dramatic, unmistakable. But the truth is, most betrayals begin quietly. They creep into the cracks, disguised as concern, fairness, or family responsibility. They disguise entitlement as equity. They mask manipulation as shared effort. What I learned is this. Generosity without boundaries becomes a doorway. And some people will walk through insisting the house belongs to them. I don't blame my mother completely. She was acting out of fear, fear of aging, fear of losing control, fear of being dependent. But fear can twist people into versions of themselves that act out of desperation rather than integrity. Kyle, on the other hand, his motives were clearer. He wanted security without accountability. Access without responsibility. Ownership without contribution. And I had spent a lifetime making it easy for them to assume I would carry everything. But the moment I drew a firm, documented line, the moment I showed calm, factual strength, the entire dynamic shifted. Not through yelling. Not through revenge. But through clarity. Ethical revenge, if you want to call it that, isn't about hurting someone back. It's about revealing the truth so unmistakably that the other person has no choice but to face it. When the truth finally surfaced in my situation, it dismantled every false narrative they had built. Every quiet manipulation. Every assumption of ownership. My home became my sanctuary again. My voice regained its strength. My generosity regained its boundaries. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that love does not require self-erasure. You can care for people deeply while still protecting yourself fiercely. To anyone listening, to anyone who has been told they're controlling simply for having boundaries, remember this. You are allowed to protect what you've built. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to require respect in your own home. And you are allowed to reclaim your peace, even when that means standing alone for a while. My mother and I slowly rebuilt a gentler relationship after she moved out. Not perfect. Not polished. But honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the only foundation strong enough to rebuild on. Thank you for listening to my story. And if you've ever faced something similar, what would you have done?